Over the years, I worked with a lot of people who struggled with chronic resentment. Maybe they resented their parents for not being affectionate or loving enough when they were kids. Or maybe they resented their spouse for not appreciating all the sacrifices they've made in their marriage. Or, really commonly, resenting bosses and coworkers at work for not kind of understanding how much stress and overwhelm a particular position really involves. And while many of these clients that I've worked with, they understand intellectually that their resentments aren't doing them any good and they want to let go of them, emotionally, it's really hard to figure out, how do I actually do that? How do I let go of my resentments? And it turns out the psychology of resentment is a little bit counterintuitive, which means the first step to truly letting go of your resentments and being free from them is to understand how resentment actually works. Hi, my name is Nick Wignall. I'm a clinical psychologist and the founder of The Friendly Mind, a free weekly newsletter where I share practical, evidence-based advice for emotional health and resilience. And today, I'm going to share 3 of my best tips for letting go of resentment. Number 1, think of resentment as a verb, not a noun. Imagine this. Let's say you're walking down the street and a car goes by you and the window's down and you hear a song playing out of that car. And that song reminds you of your father. And that memory of your father reminds you of another memory about how he hurt you or did something painful when you were young. When that memory pops into mind, it's totally normal and understandable to feel a sort of set of difficult emotions, things like anger, sorrow, or sadness, maybe even some anxiety or guilt. That's all totally normal and understandable. But when people describe feeling resentful, especially chronically resentful, it's almost always the result of a habit of rumination, which means engaging in negative and unhelpful thinking about the past. Often this takes the form of replaying an event from the past over and over and over again, well past the point where it could ever be productive. Or continually trying to understand why someone hurt you or did what they did, even though you have mountains of evidence that you're never going to figure it out. Or obsessively sort of imagining how if you had only done something a little bit different, everything could have turned out differently and been better for you. In other words, resentment is something you do, not something that happens to you. It's a verb, not a noun. Obviously, you can't change what happened in the past or whether memories of the past get triggered for you in the present. But you always have control of how you respond to those memories or triggering events. Specifically, you can choose and get much better at not ruminating, at feeling your mind getting pulled in some unhelpful direction towards something in the past, and willfully redirecting your attention to something healthier and more productive in the present. And the key to getting better at this, to not ruminating, it all starts with getting much more skillful at distinguishing the trigger, like a memory or a comment from someone, from your habit of ruminating, and realizing that while you can't control whether you get triggered, you always have control over this tendency to ruminate or not. As the great Viktor Frankl once said, between stimulus and response, there is a space. In that space is our power to choose our response. In our response lies our growth and our freedom. Number 2, what job is your resentment doing? Kind of a funny question at first blush, but let me unpack it a little bit. If resentment feels so bad, why do we keep doing it? If we know we want to let go of that habit, why do we keep engaging in it and letting it kind of run our lives? Well, all habits stick around, including bad habits, because we get something out of them. They're doing a job for us, whether we realize it or not. For example, let's say you have a habit of drinking too much alcohol before or during social engagements. Now, one of the things that habit might be doing for you is it alleviates some social anxiety you have about meeting new people or just engaging socially with folks. So even though it has a bunch of negative side effects, this habit of drinking alcohol, it also does something really powerful for you in the moment, alleviating anxiety. That's why that habit sticks around. So if you struggle with chronic resentment, it's really worth asking and meditating on this question. What job is my resentment doing for me? Is it boosting your ego by making you feel like a victim? If so, that might indicate that you need to figure out better ways to boost and strengthen your self-esteem. Is it generating anger which then blocks out some sadness you have? If that's the case, you might need to get better, for example, at validating your sadness and grief instead of trying to avoid it or block it out with anger. Maybe your resentment functions as a type of procrastination that helps you avoid or put off something important but scary that you want to do, some kind of goal. And if that's the case, as an example, you might focus on clarifying the values you have behind that goal so that you can work through the fear instead of procrastinating and avoiding it. In short, if you want to stop ruminating and feeling so resentful, start by asking yourself, what job is this rumination and resentment doing? And then look for other healthier ways to get that need met. Now, if you want to learn more about this approach, which technically is called functional analysis, I wrote up a brief guide for beginners to get started using functional analysis for any bad habit or self-defeating behavior in your life. And I will put a link to that guide in the description below. Number 3, live your life assertively. Having worked myself with a lot of people who struggle with chronic resentment, I will say that the single best predictor of who is able to truly move on from resentments and let go of them versus those who stay stuck in them is the ability to live assertively. Living assertively means that you have clarity about what you really want in life and the courage to go after it. So, for instance, when you want something, you are willing to ask for it, despite feeling nervous or awkward about doing that. And this can be in very, very small things. Asking your spouse to have Chinese food instead of Italian tonight for dinner. Or really, really big things. Maybe it's something as big as choosing to pursue a new career. It also means that when you don't want something, you're willing to say no, despite the fact that that's really hard and other people might get really upset. And again, this can take the form of very, very small things, like saying no to your kid's request for a play date this weekend because you really need time to relax and a little time for yourself, or something super big like saying no to a really impressive promotion at work because you know that the stress and extra time is ultimately not going to be good for you and your family. Finally, being assertive means when you have something that you want to express and to say and to communicate, you are willing to do it despite the fact that it's hard and that you're afraid of what other people might think of it or even you. And yes, like the other examples, this shows up both in small ways in life, sharing an idea at a meeting, despite being afraid that people think it's dumb, all the way up to something much bigger and more terrifying, like writing an op-ed for your local newspaper, defending a very, let's say, unpopular political opinion. The point is this: when you're afraid to live your life moving forward, all you have left is the past. Constantly revisiting old events, wishing things had been different, wondering what you could have done. Ultimately, I think this is why so many people stay stuck in unhelpful patterns of resentment and rumination. But once you start living into the future, going after what you really want out of life, I think you're going to find that even very large injuries or disappointments from the past have far less pull over your attention, and you're much less likely to get sucked into those unhelpful resentment spirals. Now, assertiveness is a huge topic. It's very important and very powerful, but there's a lot to it. One very simple but practical way to get started living more assertively is to take what I call an assertiveness inventory. Now, all that means is give yourself, 10 or 15 minutes and go someplace quiet. Go to the library, go to a coffee shop, maybe just sit down at your desk with a nice cup of tea or coffee and give yourself a little space. Then brainstorm, write down as many situations as possible where you want to be more assertive in your life. Again, it could be all sorts of things. It could be at home with your family. It could be at work with your coworkers, with your manager, with your boss, with your direct reports. It could be with your extended family, your family of origin. It could be with your friends. It could be in your local community. It could be all over the place. And you don't worry, do big things, do little things, do medium things. Just brainstorm, make a huge list, as many things as you can think of. And then keep that list handy. And as you go about your day for the next couple weeks, you will start to think of more assertiveness opportunities. And as you do, add them to the list. Now, this is really important because assertiveness ultimately is a skill. It's something you can get better at, Most people don't get better at it because they don't realize it's a skill, something you can improve. They just think it's a personality trait some people either have and some of us unfortunately don't have. Not true at all. But like any skill, if you're going to get better, it's not going to happen by magic or just because you have some insight about how assertiveness will be important in your life. You have to put in the reps. You have to practice. And before you can start practicing, you need a set of practice opportunities. So that's why this assertiveness inventory is so helpful, I think. Because A, it's really simple. Anyone can do this. It's not that scary just to jot down ideas for how you want to be more assertive. But once you do that, that will be really helpful if you get to the next step, which is starting to actually practice being more assertive in your life. All you need to know. Okay, let's review some of the big ideas that we talked about. If you struggle with chronic resentment, here are the 3 tips that I think you should follow. The first is, think about resentment as a verb, not a noun. You do resentment. It doesn't happen to you. And rumination is the active ingredient. That's the thing you're doing that's generating the feelings of resentment. But rumination is a habit. And like all habits, it can be broken. Well, how do we do that? How do we break a bad habit? Turns out, the best way to break a bad habit is to use this approach called functional analysis. And what that means in practice is, if you want to let go of your resentment, you need to understand what job it's doing. In other words, the habit of ruminating and all the resentment it generates, it's functional. It's doing a job for you. And if you want to let go of that habit, you need to understand what need is being met, what job is being done, so that you can get that need met in a healthier way. Lastly, live your life assertively. The more you live your life going forward, clarifying what you really want and going after it courageously, the less likely you will be to get sucked back into the past, into these unproductive spirals of rumination and resentment. Next steps. If you enjoyed this video and you want to continue learning more about the psychology of resentment and how to let go of it, I think you'll really enjoy this other video I did, which is on 4 common myths about anger, about the emotion of anger, and how they keep us stuck in unhelpful patterns of anger, including chronic resentment.